So this training is a little bit about the new future, infrastructure as a code. Mostly I'm going to try to focus in the beginning on FTD, FMC, different kind of code, but eventually the goal is to get Terraform for cloud automation moving forward for all of our products. So the agenda really quickly, overview of IAC, intro to Terraform, demo part 1. It's a quick demo, so don't expect too much out of that one. FMC Windows template review, demo part 2, which is review of the what we did in demo 1. So hopefully in 30 minutes, I tested this, should work. So what is infrastructure as a code? So the infrastructure as a code, if some of you know what dominoes is, right? We've played dominoes when we were little kids. Some of us still play dominoes. It's kind of like that. It's automation. You build every single block of code, and then eventually you just hit enter and expect everything to work. Now, and that's a beautiful world and nice theory, but that is the expectation of what it is. In IT world, we deploy full infrastructures in the cloud, a lot of times in VMware or different kind of environments, just by pressing enter, basically. Using different templates, using different scripts, just putting it all together. So a lot of times I explain this as a domino effect. But in theory, process of managing, provisioning, complete IT infrastructure, definition files, right? So idea goal, help to automating the complete infrastructure by using as many templates and everything you can do. Now, how do we do this? The core principles of this is automation is the way to go. Solving times, basically, this is going to be the future. We want to speed up. We don't want to take the time away from everything. Failure is the new norm. In a sense, it's not something IT people have a tendency to accept a lot of times. But when you write code, failure is the new term. We want to be able to change the code, be dynamic, always be flexible in adjusting it, right? And then continuing at all stages. This is not just something we deploy, we leave it alone, kind of what back in the 1980s and 90s, people would just deploy firewalls and 20 years later, you would basically put the dust off of it, right? Right now, we want to have monitoring. We want to have analytics, right? Big data came in early 2000s and we wanted to be able to study everything. Terraform is the open source infrastructure code. It's basically written by HashiCorp. It's open source and it has its own new kind of structure. Why? You've all heard of Ensemble, you've all heard of Chef, Puppet, and all the different automation tools. Terraform is a little bit different. The language is declarative, right? So how is that different? It means we're not trying to define every infrastructure. We're only defining what the end result is. That is the easiest way to explain this. It's basically telling the system what I want, and you go and get everything that you need to get. So the beauty of Terraform is that when it first started in 2014, I started playing with it. It was kind of very new. Automation, SDA was kind of starting out. Right now, it's grown to one of the most popular things, and it's actually growing even further. They just released version 1.0. They made this big deal about it. They are releasing their own even cloud to compete with AWS, Azure, and all the big ones. But they do have providers, AWS, Azure, Google, VMware, OpenStack. I mean, anything you can think of there. Nutanix is their newest one that just basically got certified for a lot of their templates. And you can take all of this code and you can deploy across the board, and it's very simple. And then we'll go through all the demo and examples. But it supports clients on different architectural, so you don't care where you are. You basically just tell it what you want, and it does it. So the lifecycle is very simple. And this is kind of the one reason a lot of engineers are liking it. It's very similar to kind of the language C++, different kind of QBasic, what if this, but it's just 4 commands: Terraform, int, plan, apply, and destroy. Now there's a few extras in between it, but if you know these 4, you are a Terraform expert. Well, kind of. So there's a lifecycle I'll put in there. It literally is also 4 steps. You write the code, you run the plan. If it's success, you run the apply. If it's successful, hey, guess what? You have a state, and when you have a state, you're deployed. But the beauty of it is if you have an error message, you're not done. You just rechange the code, update the code, and go and start the cycle again. So that's what makes it very, very easy and very, very fun to kind of work through it. Now, the components of Terraform are really simple also. First, you have the TF state, right? So configuration that you as a user configure, you define what you want, how do you want it to be provisioned, and what you want. Second, you input the source, the state, keeps up to date state of the infrastructure. So basically, the state is the infrastructure, how far have you gotten along? What does that mean? That if you're starting to deploy a code, the code, let's say something doesn't work in your code, the state could be half-baked. What that means is that half of it is already up, it stays at that state. So when you change and update your code and you fix it, you can continue. You don't have to rewrite everything from scratch because you already know what succeeded and you just have to fix the stuff that failed. So this is why failure is the new norm. It's okay to fail because you don't have to restart from point zero. Providers, right? So architecture providers for specific technologies, biggest ones, AWS, Azure, Google are basically huge on this. They are pushing this. They want, because of the common language, they want to have as many engineers, as many users, as many kind of community in a sense. This is an open source. So the community is the kind of open source concept here. And then Terraform terminologies, right? So for terminologies, again, variables is like key value pairs. It's modules to allow you customization, resources, virtual network instances, anything that you can configure and manage inside of infrastructure. So the one component I always tell people, Terraform is really easy. What makes it more difficult is understanding how Azure works, how AWS works, how Google Cloud works, VMware, right? We kind of have to become a little bit of an expert in those infrastructures. But for us as in Cisco, if we're FTD expert and FMC experts, we can start writing codes for that because we have just released the first Terraform for FTD FMC. So that is where the experience is coming through. Data source is implemented by providers to return information on external objects, and then you have your output values. Is exactly what you've configured. Very simple terminologies. So we're going to get into really quickly. This is why I wanted to do this training. I want everybody to start participating in this. If you have 5 minutes to spare, this is all it's going to take. Installation, I have the instructions here for Linux. I am a Ubuntu Linux guy. But if you like, these links can also take you to any single OS. So this works on Windows, Mac, and I think it does work on different systems, but you may have to check on that. So configure your system, trusted HashiCorp for key packages on Ubuntu, just run the dpkg and basically install Terraform. Right now, like I mentioned, version 1 just got released. So version 1.01 is the newest one up to date, stable version. And this is basically very simple. But this is going to be a demo with Azure. So I also instructed how to install Azure CLI. Now, I like Azure CLI. In Ubuntu, it is very simple, very easy to use. Some of you have used it already for years because it is very intuitive and easy to understand also. But if you use Azure CLI and Terraform together, they actually coexist. What does that mean? I'll show you that in the demo, but in a sense, this is the installations for the deb for Azure CLI. Very simple installation. Once you install this, please remember to authorize your machine for the AZ login. You can do this with -- use device code, or you can just do AZ login. And if you have a pretty good Ubuntu system, it should redirect you to a browser. So for the first demo part, I'm going to escape his and I'm going to switch over to my Ubuntu Linux. I have a VMware. So the first thing a user would do is go to GitHub, right? The goal is to get all of this code uploaded into our GitHub. But to save the time, I've already taken the liberty to put the code on the desktop on here. And as you can see, I've extracted it. It says Azure VM Linux, and there's a bunch of files here. Now, this is kind of harder to read and look at it. So I like to work in Sublime. And I'm going to kind of show you really quickly what some of these files are. So you can see here, this is the folder. The structure is going to have a few folders. Now, my terminology of Terraform is the same way how I kind of mentioned, domino effect. Why dominoes? If you notice, I numbered a lot of files 00, 010. You can do these any single way, but I've broken down them into what customers that understand. Variables, SSH keys, right? For how do we log into some of these machines? Network, how do we build a network, right? We need to build a network before we build this, the servers. So thinking more like an IT guy, you have to lay the groundwork. Once you have the groundwork, then you can start building instances or the VMs or whatever you want to call them. In my case, I like instances. And then security groups, right? So security groups is next. We build all the security policies that you want. If you've done any single ASA config or any firewall config, this is actually a very simple way to write it. We'll go through this in a second, what this means when I start the demo. And then you write your instances, right? All the virtual machines, this is where you create the virtual machines. And then output file, right? Output, this is what I want to get out of this. This is the IPs or whatever I want, the names and everything that's going to come back to me and says, hey, you are all done. Thank you very much. So to get started, again, these are the files. I am going to go ahead and start my terminal. Now, I've already installed Terraform and I've already installed Azure CLI here. But what I didn't do is started running everything. So I opened a CLI. Azure CLI is here, Terraform's here. So the first thing we want to do is what I mentioned is Terraform init. Now, what is that going to do? I'm going to show you. It starts downloading all of the plugins, everything that it needs. Now, I'll explain this in a second when we have time after I start this to kind of go through the template and explain some of the templates. But right now, it's basically pulling everything that it needs, all the plugins to make sure that it works with all of my TF files. The next thing we're going to do is Terraform, and we're going to do plan. So right now, it's basically taking and looking at it into all of my files. And all these different TF files that I'll explain in a second, it's validating, making sure that I have no error messages. All my code is written in a nice way. So I've tested this a few times. It worked. Hopefully it'll work this time. But it does take a few seconds. This runs through everything. I am going to be building 3 different instances in this. A Linux Ubuntu machine, a Windows 10 machine, and the FMC. Now, you may be asking why not the FTD. That is because it is not a good idea. There's some API stuff to build the FTD with the FMC at the same time. It will not work properly. It's good to do FTD after the FMC is spun up. It's just because how long it takes for the FMC to kind of start going after you deploy it. So as you can see here, plan has worked. And basically what you can see here, their code is very nicely. It tells us basically everything it's going to do. Azure VM Windows virtual machine windows will be created. It's going to tell us the username. It's basically looking at everything and it validates all this code. But what's the most important part at the time? Plan 23 to add, 0 to change, 0 to destroy. Now again, the 0 to change, 0 to destroy is because it keeps a state. The state is of what you have. And then the changes of the output, I want the FMC ID, public IP address of my Ubuntu, public IP address of FMC, Windows 10, and so on. So now that I know I have no error messages, everything looks good, I'm going to go ahead and execute Terraform, apply. If I can spell. And again, it's going to go ahead and run through one more time. This time it's actually going to look a little bit deeper into some of it, making sure that there's no more error messages. We'll leave it here in a second. But again, while this is kind of coming back for us, I'm going to expand a little bit on this. You can see, for example, we are creating TLS private keys. There's sensitive values, private key PAM. We are going to be getting a lot of information back from this. We can create everything from this, not just instances. We can create route tables and everything else. And here you can see answer value. Do you want to perform these actions? And my answer is yes. Now, if you type in anything other than yes, it will basically default back out and say, okay, you didn't type in yes. So if you keep hitting enter, most likely it's not going to work. So we're going to hit yes. And now you can see it's going to start executing this code. Now, this is going to start Very simple TLS private key, everything else. And I'm going to leave the demo here. Why? It takes about 5 minutes for this to be built. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to we won't be watching every single task. So I'm going to go back into and go through now in here through some of the templates. Oops. Sorry about that. I think I'm having too many slides. So create anything on Azure using Terraform, right? So I took this, but the concept is we want to be able to, using this, create a Windows, Ubuntu, FMC, FTD, and so on. You can basically start automating any single networks, and within 5 minutes, you can have 5 different VMs within the same group deployed and everything else. So let's look into this template. So how do I call these templates? So the first template is TF vars, and I'm just calling it NetSec. You can call this whatever you want. This is basically what you want to call all of your variables, right? So subnet name 1, you can call this inside, outside, subnet 1, 02, 03. You can be creative, right? You're building a demo infrastructure. You're building this for 1 hour for a customer. You can do this however you want, but you can build these however you want. Your virtual network name, you, again, call it whatever you want. Your resource location in Azure, this is where you want to deploy it. Resource group name, again, call this whatever, TJ, Terraform, RG, but these are basically variables. Now, this is the only file for the customers that I'm going to tell them, hey, you should only update this, and pretty much a use case will be deployed. Why? Because they really shouldn't go into everything, but they can, because it's easy to write the code. Why? So this then populates our 00 variables TF. This is our first TF file. And all of these variables you can see are very simple. Variable resource group name type is a string. The string gets populated from exactly this name because the resource group name matches resource group name equals TJ. So what is this going to do? This is the string I'm populating. Now, if I did not populate TF vars form, it would ask the user for every single string. So if you delete the TF vars, you can basically populate this as the template runs. You can basically input whatever you want. So that's another way. You can basically just automate the inputs as the form is deployed. But let's say you just want full automation and you don't want to input anything just in case you misspell something or fat finger. So that's very simple. You just populate everything here. And then providers TF. In this part of the template, we create the resource group. And the way that it works is resource Azure M resource group RG. Now, what is RG reference? RG basically says it's going to reference our var resource group name. Variable resource group name is basically variable resource group name. It matches this string, which is actually a resource group name TJ Terraform. The location is exactly where you want. And tags, if you know Azure or if you've ever worked on Azure, tags are very user-friendly when you have a big deployment because you can know exactly what belongs to what. So I like tags in this. They are an option, but I'm showing customers how the options are actually usable for that. So now that we done the first few, now we basically need to make sure that we match the Terraform. So here, this is where we download the plugins. All the plugins that you saw earlier that I was downloading, this is basically, I'm telling it source, HashiCorp, Azure RM, and the version that I want to download. So this is the latest version, and this template works with the latest version, but if you match the previous one, this will also work. Create the resource group name. You can see you can actually do also data, template file, startup file for the FMC, and you can do template file, FMC startup file, which will basically populate things like username, passwords. But quickly on this call, there's an API issue right now there. So that actually will not completely work. So you can put little number signs in front of it to blank it out. The thing is, I actually found a way where I'm able to populate this without a template file. You can just actually put it into the code and it works. So there's a workaround for every single issue. Diving more into the template, I'm not going to go through every single one, but here, create network, you can just really quickly see the code is very easy, does not take a lot. What I mean by that, resource, here we are creating a network interface for Windows. We are telling it which resource group and the location where we want it, and then IP configuration, right? You can call this my NIC, whatever you want, the name of the interface, subnet IP, which subnet do you want it here? I want it in subnet 1. All the subnets are defined with IP addressing. I want the IP dynamic. You can create a static IP, however you want. And again, tags Windows, tags Ubuntu, tag FMC. So I know that each of these interfaces are in different tags. These are some of the arguments that you can put in there: resource group, address space, locations, BGP community. There's a lot of different options you can do here. And then a little bit further in here, this is kind of just to show you what I've done with the template. You can see here computer name, admin username, admin password, and disable authentication false. So my custom data is actually disabled in my code. I am not running this. I'm actually populating Tomasz, and this is going to be the password for the FMC SSH, which will work. The only problem we cannot automate right now is the GUI login. The GUI login, you have to put in the license, and you have to fill that stuff out. We cannot automate that. So it will basically bring up the FMC, and then you still have to log in with admin 1 to 3, and go through the process of that. But SSH, you will be able to SSH through it. There's some work being done where we'll be able to hopefully automate that soon, but that's future. So let's go back to the demo. It's been about 5 minutes, and let's see actually what we have. Yay, it's done. So you can see here, basically, we actually deployed it. I even got it faster than 5 minutes, so it looks like, thank you, Microsoft. We got our Linux virtual machine FMC still creating about 4 minutes, 20 seconds, and it did. So autocomplete, sort 23 edit. You can see here our outputs. You can take all these outputs, copy and paste into your text file, however you want, but these are my IP addresses. And let's see if FMC works, right? So we know we have an SSH key. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this. And this one, it fails, please do not laugh, but SSH L Tomasz, put this paste. It's asking us for the key. It's asking for Firepower Management Center. And let's do, because I forgot the password really quickly. This is what happens when you create crazy passwords. Okay. I don't know if I was typing or not, so let's try it one more time. Yeah, looks like I can't type password, so let's, hold on, what am I missing here? Oh, bang. There you go. So you can see here, it's Tomasz at FMC. I know my SSH, everything that I've created works. Again, this is basically telling me that I'm able to log into this. Now, what does that all look like? This is all great, right? So let's take a look at the Azure portal. So here I already have the portal, virtual machines. And I apologize. Okay, there we go. So here I created, you can see TJ Terraform. These are the resource group I created. East US, Terraform, RG is US running, Linux, and Windows. My IP addresses, these are the same ones I got from my output. So if you don't want to log in here, you don't have to log in here. You can see that part of my resource group is everything matching on a single one. What else does that mean? I have my FMC, my Ubuntu, and my Windows. Going back over here, I can actually take a look at my security groups that I created will all match into the 2 different security groups, because then I ended up creating 2. One was for FMC. You can see they are part of the same resource group. And this one is for NSG production. So for Windows, this is for FMC. You can assign as many as you want. But instead of creating this all manual, within 5 minutes, I was able to deploy a full entire infrastructure. And if you look at your virtual networks, same thing. I have my virtual network, everything matching under single my VNet production with all my different subnets and so on, all the infrastructures, everything in this. We can RDP to the Windows because I have my RDP. Here's my IP addresses. You can see NIC Windows. However you name these, this will come up like exactly what you want. FMC management, NIC production. So this is my Ubuntu, NIC Windows, my Windows machine. and so on. So now that we have a full infrastructure, the only thing that is taking so long, and I'm not going to show you everything in this, so let me just go back to this, is FMC still booting, and it takes an additional 15 to 20 minutes. I counted this a few times today. It takes about that long for the FMC to kind of boot up so you can get into the GUI. But as we all know, CLI is already up and working. It's from the FMC. So going back, let's continue here. So how can you help? So this is kind of the quick demo. Oh, and really quickly, just to show you, let's exit this. Now that we have the final is Terraform destroy. And really quickly, I can basically take this infrastructure down. This will start now checking the state and tear down every single thing that we've built. So while that's running that, how can you help? The future is automation, right? Explore Terraform, install it, start learning it. I'm no expert. I have been using it before, and I'm happy to get back into it. I thought of, in 2014, 15, this was the future. It's a little delayed, but I'm happy I'm back in it. Basically, the cycle is very simple. Deploy existing code. There's a lot of templates out there for Linux machines, for ASAs, for FTDs. I'm going to release these FMCs on the GitHub. You guys can go ahead and make them better, make them whatever you want. But it's expendable, right? So we can continue growing the future. How? Build new code, build new templates. It's really simple. Copy and paste some of it. Learn really quickly. Fail. Fail as many times. I know I have. It's very easy, but it's addicting. Try again, and then just continue the cycle. You will just keep getting stronger and stronger. Cisco, ASA, and ACI, we right now are the only ASA and ACI is the only providers. The future, my goal is to get OpenStack, Nutanix, Kubernetes, Azure, as many templates as possible. As you can see here, this is a screenshot of the providers. AWS, Azure, Google, Kubernetes, Oracle, and Alibaba are the big players. But underneath it, you can see Active Directory, Azure Stack, there's Cloud, there's Google Docs, there's so many more. And there's Cisco ASA, you can see we do have a provider in there. And we're trying to get FTD right now, FMC FTD code validated and deployed. We've tested it, I've tested it, and it works. Hopefully we can get it provided in HashiCorp, and that's gonna grow. GitHub support. You can see if some of you have not, create awareness. My goal is to take this and start doing this to CX showcase, partner showcase, start people downloading this code. There's no perfection. The code is never perfect. Why? Because it constantly takes the use case and you apply the code against the use case. So if you need 10 Windows machines, if you need Windows servers, the goal is to teach people and us become the leader for the automation. So code is never perfect, and then have fun. I actually told a lot of people, I felt like a kid back again because of all the coding I've done. I haven't done this in years, so this is actually kind of fun. As you can see here, we have single instance FTD, multi-instance, multi-AS right now for Terraform. 29 days ago, Shibam has uploaded this. My goal is to get the ASA, FMC, and a bunch of more code uploaded and start collaborating with people. And there's more coming. What I mentioned is FMC Terraform, right? This is just an example of the different policies I've been testing. Automate FTD using Terraform, deploy FTD policies, need more creators, right? Use cases. What would you like to see? How would you like to take all these templates? What are some things that you can see how customers may automate this? But as you can see on this big list of things that we can already do, IPS policies, network objects, right? So if a customer has a bunch of network objects, we can put them in a template, deploy them, and all of a sudden, instead of inputting every single one by one, yes, you can do it with a text file, but you can't tear it down in the text file, right? You can do destroy, and it automatically destroys it really quickly. So there's a lot of things we can do through automation. Text file is just not the same. We can do outputs. We can give these to customers, partners, so they can help us build this and build the kind of cloud future. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much.